Good afternoon, everyone. And my name is Elise Garcia, and on behalf of my sisters Aman Miriam Mansour, Jody Screes, and Anissa McNamee, I want to extend our warm welcome and thanks for your coming here today. We're just delighted to be here to present Drawn by Love, a history of the Dominican Sisters of St. Catherine
Sister
of Siena,
Marie-Therese
of
Juana,
Mosul, Iraq. The author of this work, who unfortunately could not be here with us, she is in Iraq. She has been there for the last month and a half. She went there for their general chapter and then stayed on in order to continue doing some of the research for this book. Two more words. One is the title itself, Drawn by Love. It's a passage from Catherine of Siena, her Dialogue 26, in which she writes that the human heart is always drawn by love. And as I've been working with this story, that captures so beautifully the spirit of the congregation of our dear sisters of St. Catherine of Siena. Aman, we'll begin with you. Please tell us.
So we have a story behind this story. Okay. We start with the working in the history was last September. After I came back from visiting my family from Iraq, I came back was September, and I was asked by Sister Marie-Therese, who's ministering in Rome, if I am willing to translate the history into English. I was translating. I got more thirsty to know more and more and more for about the history of my congregation. So then after I finished my first draft in translation, I did ask Sister Jody if she's willing to check my grammar.
Which I loved doing. We had a standing appointment for the Regina Life. I said, why don't you ask your friend Elise to help you?
So Aman asked me, and of course I have never been able to say no to Aman. And as I started to read the story, I was just so drawn into it. It's such a compelling and powerful story that I asked Carol Costin, with whom I live and minister, if she would read it, which she did, and she too was so moved by it that we both thought this book needs to be published. It needs to get out. And so then we raised the question with Aman, who raised it with Marie-Therese, who raised it with Sister Maria, the prioress, and we got a yes. And so that was wonderful. And then what we needed to do was to raise money after we raised the yes. And not knowing whether we'd be able to raise all the money that we needed for the publication of the book, even if we could just get the printing done and the paper, I needed to find a designer who might do it on a pro bono basis if we couldn't find the funds. And so...
And who can say no to Elise? Who couldn't say no to Aman? And Jody couldn't say no to Aman, and so we all said yes. And we sat down and talked about it, and I read a couple of the chapters, and it just, so moving and so beautiful that we sat for several hours and talked about it, and it's, yes, let's do this. Started throwing around ideas, layout, design, bilingual, how were we going to do that? Do we want to do that? And yes, we do.
Rose Celeste was very enthusiastic, said yes, and took it, carried the water for us, and we did get it. So we received money from the Hilton Fund for Sisters and the Federation of Dominican Sisters, USA, which is the most wonderful thing, is to have support from these 17 congregations that are sponsors of the Federation. So a great sign of solidarity with our Iraqi sisters. So we now have the resources
to design the cover. And this is the cover, with no insides yet. But so this is how it's laid out, the English, and then you flip it open, and then the Arabic will be on that side. And the Arabic explanation on that side. These are the two title pages, Arabic and English. 2 weeks ago, a woman in Iraq, in Karakush, Rawa Poza, is a graphic designer in Iraq. So through Aman, I'm gonna, because this like took a huge burden off of me, because I would have to lay out each page, and there are no commas, there are dashes. Where would I know where the page break, the sentence break, the word break? And also something else, as a topographer and as a graphic designer, which I thought was so beautiful, that what we had laid out originally was in a Times Roman Arabic. And what Rawa said to Aman was, Times Roman is so boring. And this one, this is Sister Allah in Karakush with the children on their way to making First Communion. And this struck me as I was editing these photos, the light and the starkness from the background, and in contrast with the white dresses and the white veils of the little kids. And then, of course, this little one peeking out was just precious, so I love that.
The excerpt that I chose is from the very beginning of the book, and basically it tells the story of how Dominican life in Mesopotamia, which was the ancient name of modern-day Iraq, actually begins in the earliest days of the Dominican order. 5 years after Dominic died, a friend and contemporary of his, Italian friar Guillaume Monferrat, set out in 1226 with 2 other Dominicans on a mission east to the Holy Lands. By 1235, they had journeyed to Baghdad, a brilliant center of culture and study where Dominic had once dreamed of opening a mission. Baghdad was the intellectual center of Islam's golden age and the capital of the Islamic Empire.
I would like to read for you a story from Death March that you will find it in chapter 3 in the book. A story of Warina Isa, who survived among the 6 Katrinats who began the forced march from Sirt to Mosul. So you see the blue arrow is from Sirt, where it started, and going to Mardin, then Mosul. But the main massacre happened in Mardin. So the story goes, Warina Isa had done everything she could to protect herself during the caravan march. Warina covered her face with mud to hide her youthful beauty and carried her 3-year-old niece, so the soldiers would think she was married. And the day of the massacre, when Warina was ordered to take off her clothes, the soldiers tore the baby girl away from her. Warina and her companions wailed and prayed.
And now we jump ahead to the period after the war. And the Katrinettes had for years been striving to be recognized as a religious congregation, to gain canonical recognition as their own native community. And so these efforts were resumed after World War I. And around 1927, the Dominican order recognized the congregation as a member of the Order of Preachers. Sister Marie Raymond arrives in October, having taken the boat across the Mediterranean. And soon after arriving, she then started writing letters. She wrote faithfully. So there are many of these kinds of letters written in tiny, tiny print. And this one, and hard to read, you can see that she is here chronicling some information about each of the women in the congregation now that she's sort of responding. Here's what she writes. Sunday, November 13th. After the benediction in the Dominican Fathers' Church, the crowd gathered, as usual, and waited. At 3:30 p.m., the first reception of the habit of 3 teacher tertiaries would take place. Women, wearing their multicolored veils, sat in the men's area. Boys and girls also slid into these places as far as they could. The men gathered around the sanctuary. Covered in their black izars, the religious and secular tertiaries had much difficulty getting to their places. Father Francois Drapier had to call the police and order the men to go to the rear for this occasion
That remains really
and free the front
seared in
area for the
minds of
Catharonettes,
all
as they are
Iraqi
called.
people. Is the
There was
Feast of St.
unaccustomed
Joseph, March
animation
19th,
and quite loud
2003. And chapter 10 tells the story of this March U.S. invasion of Iraq. During that initial massive assault, many families fled from Baghdad and Mosul to safety in the villages in the north. Likewise, the community itself not only sent its postulants home to live with their families, but sent the novices and the sisters for shelter at their convents in the villages north. Weeks later, after the invading forces had power, and it appeared that there were no more bombs, the sisters, the postulants, and the novices returned to the mother house in Mosul. And on the feast of Mary Magdalene, Sister Ban and Sister Aman, they were in the building when on July 22nd, 2003, at 1:30 a.m., while everyone in the mother house was sleeping, a missile hit the wing of the novitiate where 3 postulants were asleep. Sister Huda quickly counted all the postulants and novices, realizing in dread that a novice was missing. Running up to the novice's bedroom, she found her asleep in the bed and shook her awake. The sleepy novice asked, "What's the matter?" Sister Huda said, "Didn't you hear the explosion?" The novice shrugged and said, "I heard that sound every day at home." We said at the beginning, this book was to be 1 chapter. It is now 12 chapters. And as we, English and Arabic, and in the middle, 20 pages of photographs.